Harvesting of humans in the Amazon forest. Early modern humans and the eventual Atlantis thrived on two principles. A. Harvesting of humans in the Amazon forest, where they were thriving. B. Harvesting of resources across all continents. In this video we will present the principle of the harvesting of humans in the Amazon forest. Humans, more specifically the Amazon Amerinds, historically were thriving, this so at least in the Amazon forest, this so at least since 2 million years ago. We will argue and prove the period of 2 million years of modern human thriving in other videos. The Amazon forest was one of the very few places on the planet that remained relatively unaffected by the millions of years of subsequent roughly 100,000-year-long ice ages. Sunshine and rain were abundant, this at least so in the eventual forest refuges. The source of all they needed was the result of photosynthesis, and the Amazon Amerinds would recycle literally everything, and feed it back into the cycle, inevitably leading to continuous enrichment of the soil and forest. They would even recycle all their feces and urine into compost. Houses were burned and recycled into compost at death. Their flesh would be burned and recycled into compost at death. Their bones would be burned and crushed and recycled into compost at death. Sometimes their bones would be preserved in a kind of mummification process and buried in sometimes very large decorated urns. This would involve a lot of details and clearly was an important ritual. This is absolutely proven by means of thousands of urns, and by the meters-thick layers of urns, ceramics, and Amazon dark earth soils, that would have taken many thousands of years to build up. These meters-thick Amazon dark earth, that sustains the Amazon forest and its biodiversity until today, are absolute proof of dense populations with absolute sustainable lifestyles. That is also the reason it is harder to find evidence, except for the recent, but all around Amazon dark earth soils solid evidence. They are the absolute long-term example of a 100% sustainable lifestyle. This lifestyle went on possibly close to the year 1500 when their lifestyles were definitively disturbed by the European conquest, and they would lose at best a large part of all the complete knowledge of before. Even with this loss of their knowledge they still kind of thrive today, even without medical or any other assistance, and medium women give natural birth to 6 healthy children before they reach 30 years of age. Obviously they raise their children mostly themselves, as there is no assistance at all as said, this with males somehow taking part in the raising of these natural living children. Some women, and especially educated women, have less or no children, so most probably quite some women raise over 10 children without any assistance. Certainly in that regard we can safely claim that they still today thrive in the Amazon forest. The few tribes that had their health studied present the best heart and brain health of all peoples of the world, this despite high inflammatory markers, partly because they carry and do not eliminate certain worms, that are well known to negatively affect health. We can safely assume that they also thrived, or even more so, before their lifestyles and knowledge were definitively disturbed by the European conquest. It is amongst these thriving people that the harvesting of a seemingly endless citizens and working class would take place. This in order to deploy the members of that harvested working class possibly as kind of like robots or slaves across the world. This harvesting of this working class would take place in the Amazon forest, and later possibly also in other tropical forests across the world, where humans and biodiversity were able to thrive as long as left undisturbed, because of the sustainable practices that the Amazon Amerinds developed in the carbon agroforests that they supported. That is why also the domesticated crops and animals of the Native Americans spread across the world. You can compare the above harvesting somewhat with the Europeans making slaves in Africa, although this of course happened much more recently, and in comparison over a limited period of time. Probably the here discussed harvesting of working class or citizens is more comparable with the much later Incas making slaves amongst the Amazon Amerinds, and taking them into their sphere, to subdue them and make them slaves, probably to work in agriculture, this at least so initially, relatively close to their native grounds and forests. Eventually to be sent afterwards to other continents, most probably under some kind of supervision, even if the supervision was rather cultural. This sending out to other continents surely had stopped by the time of the conquest, but possibly long before. This harvesting of humans in the Amazon forest is also why all ancestral markers and the whole genome haplotype tree, over and over point to and out of the Americas, and more specifically to the Amazon forest. The general public today, and this for at least centuries, is very little aware of the above, and very little made aware of this despite all recent evidence. And this in its turn is the reason consensus systematically negates these for science essential ancestral markers, as well as the very clear and useful whole genome haplotype tree. In other videos we argue and prove that the bulk of polygonal walls and works were built, this at least in Europe by the Aurignacian culture, between 47,000 and 41,000 years ago. The Aurignacian culture people carry Y-DNA haplogroup C and R1b, which both have their roots in the Americas. How could these people have built polygonal walls and works across the world, this between 47,000 and 41,000 years ago, if they had not migrated out of the Americas before? How could the Native Americans only exist since roughly 13,000 years ago, if there are hundreds of polygonal walls and works across all of the Americas, which were provingly built in prehistory and more specifically in the period between 47,000 and 41,000 years ago?